Picture this. You are standing in a coffee shop and the person behind the counter is waiting. It is a simple question, what would you like? But your mind is already 3 steps ahead, running through every possible option, weighing the consequences of each one, wondering what your choice says about you, whether you will regret it, whether you should have just made a decision before you walked in. The line behind you grows. Your chest tightens. And by the time you finally say something, you are already second-guessing it before the words have fully left your mouth. This is not about coffee. It never really was. Overthinking small decisions is one of the most quietly exhausting experiences a person can live with. And if this is your reality, you already know that it goes far beyond what most people assume. It is not indecisiveness. It is not laziness or a lack of confidence in the simple sense. What is actually happening beneath the surface is far more psychologically layered, and understanding it, really understanding it, might be the first step toward finding some peace with your own mind. Here is what most people miss. Overthinking is not a thinking problem. It is an anxiety problem wearing the costume of logic. When you agonize over a small decision, your brain is not actually trying to find the perfect answer. It is trying to protect you from something, from judgment, from regret, from the unbearable feeling that you chose wrong and now have to live with that. The thinking feels productive because at least you are doing something, at least you are trying to get it right. But the mind caught in this pattern is not moving toward clarity. It is running in circles, burning energy, and arriving back at the same place it started, uncertain, exhausted, and somehow more anxious than before. So where does this come from? Because people are not born this way. No child instinctively agonizes over which crayon to pick up first. This pattern develops, and it almost always develops in response to an environment where decisions felt dangerous. Maybe you grew up in a home where making the wrong choice had consequences, where a parent was unpredictable, where mistakes were met with criticism or disappointment, where you learned early that getting it right was not just preferable, it was necessary for emotional safety. Or perhaps the message was subtler than that. Maybe you were raised in an environment where your preferences were consistently overridden, where adults made choices for you so often that you never truly learned to trust your own instincts. When you are never allowed to practice deciding, you never develop confidence in your own judgment. There is also the role of perfectionism here, and it is worth sitting with for a moment. Perfectionism is often described as a high standard, but psychologically, it functions more like a defense mechanism. If I get this exactly right, nothing bad will happen. If I think about this long enough, I can guarantee the outcome. The painful irony is that this level of control is an illusion. Life does not work that way. Outcomes cannot be guaranteed no matter how long you deliberate. But for someone whose nervous system learned that mistakes equal danger, the illusion of control through overthinking feels far safer than the vulnerability of simply choosing and seeing what happens. And this is where it begins to affect everyday life in ways that go far beyond decision-making itself. When you overthink constantly, you are spending enormous amounts of mental and emotional energy on things that most people around you resolve in seconds. Choosing what to eat, responding to a text message, deciding whether to bring something up in a conversation or let it go, whether to apply for that job, whether to say yes or no to an invitation. Each of these moments becomes a small internal trial, and by the end of an ordinary day, you are not just tired, you are depleted in a way that is very difficult to explain to people who do not experience it. Relationships are particularly affected. The overthinking mind tends to replay conversations long after they have ended, searching for what was said incorrectly, what might have been misunderstood, what the other person actually meant by that pause or that particular choice of words. You might find yourself rehearsing conversations before they happen, crafting and recrafting what you are going to say, only to have the actual exchange unfold completely differently and leave you scrambling. Intimacy becomes complicated when every interaction feels like a test you might fail, and the people in your life, even the ones who love you deeply, may not fully understand why something that seems so small is taking up so much of your space. There is something else that rarely gets named, and it matters. Overthinking is often rooted in a profound distrust of the self. Somewhere along the way, you absorb the belief that your first instinct is probably wrong, that your gut cannot be trusted, that without sufficient deliberation, you will inevitably make the wrong call. This belief is not the truth about you, it is a story that was handed to you, often by circumstances or people who did not realize the weight of what they were giving. But it has lived inside you long enough that it feels like fact. And so you keep thinking, keep analyzing, keep looking for the answer that feels safe enough to act on. The tragedy is that no answer ever feels quite safe enough, because the fear was never really about the decision. It was about you. about whether you are capable, whether you are enough, whether your choices, and by extension, you yourself are worthy of trust. Recognizing this changes something, because when you understand that the overthinking is a form of self-protection, that your mind developed this pattern trying to keep you safe, you can begin to relate to it differently, not with frustration, not with the exhausted inner voice that says, why cannot I just be normal? Why cannot I just decide? But with something closer to compassion. This pattern made sense once. It was a response to a world that felt uncertain or critical or unsafe. Your mind was doing its best. It still is. The work of moving through this is not about forcing yourself to decide faster or silencing the thoughts through sheer willpower. It is about gradually, gently rebuilding the relationship you have with your own judgment. It starts small, intentionally making low-stakes decisions without deliberating, not because the outcome does not matter, but because you are practicing the experience of choosing and surviving it, of noticing that when you trust yourself, even imperfectly, the world does not collapse. That regret, when it comes, is manageable, that you are more resilient than the anxious part of your mind believes you to be. It also means learning to distinguish between thinking that is genuinely useful and thinking that is simply spinning. Useful thinking moves you forward, gives you new information, helps you see the situation more clearly. Spinning keeps you in the same place, recycling the same fears in slightly different arrangements. When you notice yourself spinning, the invitation is not to think harder. It is to pause, breathe, and ask a quieter question, not what is the right answer, but what do I actually want? Because buried underneath all the analysis, underneath the second guessing and the rehearsing and the replaying, there is a version of you that already knows. That version has instincts worth listening to, preferences worth honoring, a voice that has been there all along, waiting patiently beneath the noise. You are not broken because you overthink. You are a person who learned to survive uncertainty by trying to think your way through it. That is understandable. That is human, and it is also not the only way forward. Healing looks like learning slowly and with great self-compassion that you can trust yourself to choose, that you can handle what comes next, that you do not have to think your way into safety, because safety was never really in the thinking at all. It was always in learning to come home to yourself.